Okay, let's start. Hi, welcome to this month's webinar. Today we're going to talk about clean tests, specifically about web tests. The principles we're going to talk about are universal, I think, but they also apply to server code and stuff like that. But the specific things that are more apparent in web tests, and we're going to talk about them today. I'm going to also talk about clean code and stuff like that because I like the clean stuff. Yeah, so let's start. Leave Mr. Skeleton here alone with his cobwebs. So thanks again for coming. My name is Gil. I'm a trainer and a consultant about development, testing, all kinds of activities that happen around software, everything that helps make software better, both of these two books. And this is how you can get in touch with me. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of spread around a couple of trainings and workshops that I do. So you're interested in clean code and unit testing and web testing, web automation, API automation. I'm going to also mention APIs today. And you feel there's a skill gap that you want to jump over, or somewhere that you want a boost, let me know. Maybe I can help you. Okay, so I'm going to start just by jumping into the code. I'm going to show you the application that we're going to test today and the test that I already have for it. So let's jump into Visual Studio. Okay, so this is my web application. If you've seen one of my recent webinars, you might have seen it. Basically, it's a web application. It doesn't matter for our purpose today. It's written in React and Next.js, running locally. Basically, what we have is a registration page, 3 input boxes, a checkbox that comes up at the beginning that says I want to get promotions, because who doesn't? And this button is disabled, and then you press the I have read the whole term sheet and agree, because who doesn't like to read whole term sheets? So once you do that, this is here enabled, and there's some kind of validation behind in the code behind. So if one of these is empty and the email doesn't look like an email, you'll get this kind of error here. And when you type something here, it goes away. So if you do something like, let's write something here that looks like g@g.com, which I promise doesn't exist. And when you do this, you get a message with thank you with the first name here. That's basically it. That's what I want to test. Behind the scenes, the data that I sent gets also saved, which I'm going to need to test as well, but it's interesting, but not that interesting. That's basically it. Now, for this, I have these tests. So I'm using, for our purpose today, we're going to use Playwright in JavaScript, TypeScript. But the principles apply to whatever framework you're using, Selenium, Cypress, something that you've built in your own garage in your spare time, that works as well. So what do we have here? So there's a startup test. Whatever happens in the startup. So whenever you, if this is the first time you see tests for web, I hope it's not the last time you see it. Basically, these tests are about finding elements in the page, like this one gets the text here, and this one checks for looks for the first boxes. In Playwright, they're called locators. You search for them, basically running over the HTML, and then they find, and then you can interact with them. You can check things like expect to be empty, which I expect these things to be on startup, and then you can do at the startup, you don't do anything, just check for them. And I'm checking the term box. This one's checked, this one's unchecked, although you might not be able to see that. Let me just squeeze this a bit. And then we have a whole test for the validations, which looks like a very big block of code on purpose, because that's how I built it. There are reasons that these things look like that. There are things that you don't even know that look why they look like that. I'll explain also. But one of the things that we do is like we start going over steps and continue from where we were. So it's a mix of finding locators, doing some interaction like clicking and filling and clearing in this case. And it goes on and on. And the reason I put some lame comments here, it's just for me, because when I was doing this, I was getting mixed up on what am I actually doing and what kind of code am I looking at, because everything looks basically the same here. We have a test that enables disables the button with the checkbox, and this actually does the whole end-to-end thing. So I'm navigating to this page and entering the first name and last name email, clicking the register and checking that I got the thank you. And these lines here basically check that the data was saved correctly to the database. Doesn't really matter for today. And this piece of test actually does check the thank you page, because we're navigating to a thank you page. If we don't send the query parameter, the name, first name, it asks politely, who are you? So this covers most of the functionality that we have here, which is great, but it's also hard to read. So let's get back to the slides and we'll talk about that. So as you can see, everything's fine. So when we're talking about test code and clean tests, kind of the final variation of that, you'll see that people treat tests differently than they do when they talk about clean code. So clean code has been for, I don't know, like 40 years, ever since there was code. So we were talking about that. Uncle Bob Martin wrote a series of books about clean code in the 90s and later than that. And it basically comes to maintainability, which we'll talk about, and why we're doing that. But once we're talking about standards and how we treat code that we want to be clean, we don't apply the same standards to tests. And there are reasons for that, because sometimes we don't consider tests as something that we're going to come again into. We know that we will, but we kind of push this away. And when one test is passing, you say, okay, this is great. Let's move on to the next one. And we do move on to the next one. We copy the last one that worked and modify it a bit. Now, copying and pasting is not like a bad method of the software development, but when you copy something ugly, you get twice the ugliness. So we don't want that, but we do that a lot in tests. So this is how we spread the disease around. And because of that, we kind of, in our minds, we have like different way of looking at code, and our perspective is different, and therefore we apply different standards. So even if we do keep talking about clean code and apply to the production code, we don't do that the same with our tests. And unless you don't do anything about clean code, and then you apply the same thing for your tests, if you have tests, but I'm guessing we're not these kind of people. So like I said, clean code is a set of patterns and principles and techniques. And you can read all about this. I do courses and workshops about this. I did want to get here a couple of, not definitions, but sayings about clean code, because I think it will kind of lead us to where we want to do. And this is about clean code. We're going to apply this to clean tests as well. So the first one is from Grady Butch. Grady Butch is one of the three people who led the object orientation revolution sort of, in the late 80s, 90s. He wrote that clean code is simple and direct, and it should be written like prose. Now, remember how my code looked like? It does not look like prose. It looks like torture. And when you start thinking about it, like, this is clean code, is my code looking like that? Well, it's like, is my test looking like that? But first, does my code tell the story of what it actually does? Not all the time. So, and simple and direct, yeah, we can work on that too. So this is what Grady Butch wrote, and I think we can take a lot from here. It's one simple sentence too. I want to mention another one by Michael Feathers. Michael Feathers wrote the book Working Effectively with Legacy Code. And legacy code is not the opposite of clean code, but the patterns around them usually relate to each other. He wrote that clean code always looks like it was written by someone who cares. And I spent like some time thinking about, care about what? And I came to a few conclusions. The first thing was care about other people, because even if these other people are me, I'm going to go into that code again someday. And when I do that, I want to do things in there like fixing bugs or extending, adding another feature. And I want to do this quickly. And I want to do this without introducing new risks or new bugs. So I want the next person who goes into the code to spend their time as best as possible, as quickly as possible, as riskless as possible. And for me, it's really about the time that I'm going to spend there. If I'm going to, if it's going to be me or you that going back into this code, I want you to spend this time better. This is for me caring, well, sort of definition. So we're not going to talk about too much about cleaning the code today, but we obviously we want to clean the code as much as possible every time we get there. And that is true also for the tests, because tests are basically a documentation, an example of how to use the code. So why not make it easy for me to go back into the code by making the tests more readable, more maintainable, all these able things. We usually talk about code smells when we're talking about clean code, and code smells are anti-patterns of how to write code, or patterns of how not to write code. And the common thing about code smells is that it's not that the code is wrong, but it's going to cost you in maintainability, the time that you're going to spend there. So there are a lot of code smells. Today we're going to talk about the test smells, and I want to mention 4. You already see the one that, the ones that have some kind of a parallel with clean code, but these are more apparent in tests. The first one is duplication. Now, everybody has been to software school on the first day and knows that it's a crime to duplicate code. In tests, we do it a lot more because once we have a tested passing, it's easier to, instead of writing the next test from scratch, to take what I've written and modify it a bit. And like I said, it's okay to duplicate something that's good. In some ways, we can't eradicate duplication completely, but if we're copying something that's like massive, we're kind of digging the hole for ourselves. Which leads us to omnipotence, which is like we have anti-patterns that are called God class and God methods in clean code, and these are like giant methods and classes, and everybody knows that what these things look like, and everybody who looks at them don't want to spend much time with them. Tests are the same. You already seen like not very big tests, but it's easier to like get lost in which point are we at this, in which stage are we, and the more the larger the path that we're testing, be it API or an integration or UI test, we will do more in this test. The setup will be bigger, the operations will be more than that. And like I said, specifically in web tests, because it costs us, we'd rather, instead of just starting from a certain point, continue from where we are, continuing this like big workflow. And it's hard to follow this workflow. And it can break on all these kind of stages, and then we'll need to debug. And like I said, like not having a very lovely time there in the test code. Clutter. What I did was like something very simple. I dumped every test in the same file. Obviously, we can't do this with more than like 10 tests, and then we need some kind of method to the madness. And this kind of, if we don't have this kind of at least rules of where to put tests, things happen. I need to run everything in this file in order usually to do this, and tests may take longer, and I'll get more delays and stuff like that. And once I start like having some kind of system, I want to know that if I have another test, where do I put it? I want to run just a subset of these tests. If everything's stuck together, it's going to be hard. And the final thing, which is also true to clean code itself, but a lot of it happens in tests, is that we're using test frameworks. I'm using Playwright today, but whatever you're using is going to have the same problem. And the problem is that the frameworks, let's talk about Playwright, for example, but it's true for Selenium, Cypress, whatever. These are general purpose automation frameworks. These are not your application framework. And they are talking in the language of locators and operations like clicking and stuff like that. And while we're very familiar with clicking buttons and text box and stuff like that, it's not application language. It's like the technological view. So we sometimes translate very well, but when we're starting to talk about, for example, the relationship between the checkbox of the terms and the enabling and disabling of the button, I just told you the functionality of these elements, but there is some kind of business thing around it. If I haven't agreed to the terms, I can't move on with the registration. The thing that on startup, the promotion checkbox is checked by definition, by requirement, is a technical thing that has a business meaning behind it. I want to push the promotions first. So while tests tell me in technically what are the elements on the screen that I'm going to interact with, they don't tell the story from the user's perspective. And they actually can do that. So let's dive in. I'm going to show you in steps. You've already seen what I've started with. I'm going to continue doing this in steps. If you're familiar with page objects, we'll get to that in later on. If not, that's still okay. The things that I've done are starting from this, and I moved on to make my code better. And I try to do like small steps, and I hope that you can see that these things are very helpful by themselves. So the first thing I did is getting rid or refactoring these things. So this basically, like, if this isn't the application, what isn't? Right? I'm just doing these things over and over and over again. And like you've seen before, like I had to squeeze out the application so you could see what's actually happening here. Turns out that whatever you're using, it's going to be like a very long lines, and it makes it harder to read. And the fact that it repeats itself makes it harder to read as well. So first thing I did was take all the locators, transferred them, like wrap them in functions, passing the page object, the page fixture, and getting the thing here. So small abstraction, the result is that I have shorter rows, which I like. Not much, not a very big difference, but yeah, it squeezes into a very small screen. And it does has an impact on how we read. Okay, so yeah, I could have stopped here, but then we wouldn't have a full webinar. Let's talk about organization. I was kind of debating with myself, should I do this, like the extracting the locators or the organization first? I decided that before I started moving things around, I'd rather have extracted things first. So these extracted here, and let's talk about organization. So what I did, and like I said, people with familiar with page objects will see the similarity, but you don't have to have a page object to do this kind of organization. I created a folder for the registration page, and this is just moving the tests around. So I have two for the registration page, for the thank you page, and the workflow, which is kind of go through them. Locators stay the same, but out of the 6 tests I have, one of them sits here. And if you look at it, by the way, you'll see that it's easier to read than before. And the reason is one of the things about psychology of reading code is that you don't have like things here. The openness that we have, that the negative space that we have, actually helps us understand code better, faster. We don't have the mental load of disregarding everything that's happening here. So just by moving test to like a separate file, I've made it easier for me to read. And I did this for the error things. And for the registration, I split it into 2 things. First, I had the startup, which sits by itself, and the behavior, which covers the enabling and disabling of the button and invalid inputs. Why? One step, I saw 2 steps actually ahead. What you may see is that these two, well, all of my tests are starting at the registration page. When we're talking about setup, the startup and the behavior, they might have a different setup. So this is like something that I'd like to do. If I already see that we're going to have a separate setup, it's a good place to do some kind of separation. If you don't, you'll see it in 2 or 3 steps ahead. So we have like two things here. This is cool, and because we have this, we have for everyone who messed around with some kind of test framework, know that there's something called a fixture before each, after each. Playwright has something like that for the same. So all my other tests are in separate files. Here, these two appear in the same thing. Remove the application. Let's remove the application. And so I removed this setup here, which is different than the one of the one with the startup, because I'm going to check the box, and the startup, I don't have that. So apart from that, what I did was, apart from the navigation to the registration page, which shortens my test, I had to think about this because when I started, I had these comments to tell me what I'm actually doing here. And this is like splitting the comments as well. So this was like a flag. I need to take care of this in terms of meaning, because I separated one step from the second here. So we'll need to think about that later. Okay, so having a single setup helps do 2 things. First, it's shortens the tests. The second is it creates what I call differentiation. What's left in the tests are the things that are different. So when you have tests that are very similar, they do because you, they're very similar because you copied them with the first one and modified it. You'll get to a position where one of them fails, one of them passes, and you want to see what's the difference between them. And if there's a lot of code duplicated in them, it will be hard to do. By extracting common setup before each or something similar, we're creating the separation. So if the tests are sitting together, in terms of organization, it will be visually more easier to identify what are the differences between those. Okay, so that was the common setup. Next step was to handle this thing here. Now, this is an example of where you do, and a very good example, I think, but I tried to actually do this, and I kind of, and by the way, if you're doing like test generation with a tool, which I didn't do here, you'll get a lot of this. Because you'll create a workflow that will go through all the steps, and you're not stopping to record and going back to scratch. So what you'll have to have is something that in your mind, and my mind as well, a test that handles covers some kind of functionality, and it kind of comes up like this. So I already did the work. I created blocks of code that deal with something, and what you see here, it really is not easy to understand, is that I'm checking that first I add my register button is enabled, then click it, make sure in order to see the error message, then typing something to clear the message, which you can't really know if you're not really reading the code. But this, by typing this is like type something in the first name text box. This actually clears the error, and the only way to know that is to read the next line, which I did this, and then it's starting playing with all clearing the text boxes, filling one box, seeing that it created the error for, fortunately for us, same error, and looking for that and clearing it up and so on. And I decided to split these things. Now, obviously, I'll show you how it looks. This looks a lot better because even the enabling disabling part, I start giving it better names, enabling the disabled button, disabling the enabled button. I no longer need the comments, and each of the case is about creating the error and making sure that it gets both visible and then cleared. It's better in terms of understanding, and obviously it comes with a cost. It may, because each test starts from scratch, and we might need to consider that about the big setup and stuff like that. I believe that the maintenance actually is a lot bigger cost than what we're actually running or experiencing, but we usually don't do that. We don't think about the maintenance that will come in the future. We're just experiencing runtime now. Turns out that it is easier to create this with smaller bits, also in terms of generation, until you actually get something that's working. But again, this is how I feel, and I've spent a lot of time arguing with people about this. Okay, so that's splitting. Next thing I did was give better names. So what I did up until now is just mess with the locators, and I took another step. So instead of just filling the boxes with this, and I just used A here, I said type anything in email, type anything in last name, type anything in first name, kept the things that we mostly understand, like click register, uncheck, and stuff like that, and fill. And I took all the actions into one place and took all the assertions into another. So when I do this, test starting looking like this, which is a lot better. So navigate, I should see the title, all inputs should be empty, promotion box should be checked, text box should be checked, button should be disabled. Let's look at the whole workflow, how it looks. Navigate, check text box, fill first name with Gil, blah, 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 blah. Click the register. I should display thank you. And this is like the test for the data. A lot better. Could be better, but that's not good. That's not bad. The final thing I did is took all these strings to another file. So these call them literal or consts. All these paths, all the strings that we're using, you probably need to remove the duplication of them, create constants for them. I do want to mention one convention that I use. Note that I've used the prefix any for things that can be anything. And anything other than that becomes something more special, like this email. This is a valid email. Sure, it can be like something with Gmail or stuff like that. But for the test, I'm going to use valid email. And the test then looks like this. Let's look at the first. So when I fill in the first name, it's going to be any first name and any last name, but it has to be a valid email. And this kind of signals to me that for this, I can send anything, but when I'm going to touch or, the value of the email, I need to be a bit more concerned about this because the other values are just there to make the test pass. This is more important than the other thing. So a convention of even signaling what is more important, what is not important, any AD or special AD is helping in making the tests more readable, more explaining what they're actually trying to do. And this was everything I did until I got to the point where I said, okay, we need to talk about page object models. So let's do that. So page objects are really a way to represent interactions and actions that we have with part of the screen or a whole screen or a page. It's not a new idea because basically it's built on years and years of a principle called separation of concerns. A code that deals with one thing doesn't need to be mixed with a code that needs other things. We've already done this when I separated things in terms of this goes into registration, this goes into thank you page, because these things are different. They don't talk to each other. The code that deals with the thank you page doesn't need to be in there with the registration page. So that's the idea behind it. And so basically it does that. It does a couple more things. It can do others. The other thing that it does, it creates an abstraction. So like the names that I gave my functions, a page object will expose functions or methods that abstract the internals of how it interacts with the page. If the page changes, but the meaning of what the functions that gets exposed is still the same, like the locator changed or we changed a radio button to a checkbox. The test doesn't need to know that. I'm going to show you examples of this, and obviously the tests become more maintainable, more readable. We've already seen the road to that. Let's look at how this thing looks, and I'm going to specifically talk about the first one, because the first one you can see my actions are gone, my literals, my locators are gone, because now I have page objects. So the page object looks like this. I've pulled all the literals, the constants that appear in the registration page over here. This class has all kinds of locators in them, and why it's red, because TypeScript screams at me because they're not initialized, and there's a reason, because I can't initialize them in the constructor because the constructor does not work asynchronously. So it's a design choice. I chose to have an initialize method that navigates and then finds all the locators there, and then all the functions that I had outside now appear in this class. So type email, type first name, type these things don't have to be in the same place as the thank you page. I have a click button and a submit, which kind of look the same, but they're not. And uncheck and check terms. All the functions I pulled here. Thank you page looks smaller because it doesn't have a lot, but it does have the same construct. And because I separated the construction for initializations, I created a page factory. So if you work with Selenium, they have a page factory which is similar but not the same. They have the page factory in Selenium initializes the page objects. Mine does as well because I built it this way. The only reason I have this is because I need to construct and then initialize the things separately. In other languages, for example, like Java or C#, this would be like probably the same line, might not need that. Okay, how does the test look? So, like I said, one thing I did is I just pulled the actions into the pages. I didn't pull the asserts. So, for example, let's look at the startup because it's, let's look at the behavior first. Check terms box, uncheck terms box, click button are now part of the register page, obviously. And this is more helpful. Why? Because the way we read the code is from the left to the right. And now we see, this is part of the register page. It sits in the register test as well. So it does make sense to us more. What is left outside, though, I kept the asserts. And why do they? And the asserts still sit here. And obviously, they work with the right page right now. Okay, instead of a regular page, they call the properties, the locators, and check on them. Now, why do I show you this? If we're talking about abstraction, this is a bad abstraction, bad encapsulation, sorry. Because the locators are exposed and basically you let somebody else, the test, do something with them. In terms of abstract encapsulation, that's not a very good encapsulation because, for example, if I'm now, I want to move on from, I don't know, Playwright to Selenium, test shouldn't be changed for that, only the page object, because it creates the abstraction above that. The problem is not with this code, is specifically with Playwright documentation, because this is how it tells you what a page object does and how you should work with them. And it's exactly like that. So if you look at the examples that you have in Playwright, and it's not just Playwright, you'll see that you'll have the functionality for interaction in the page objects, but the assertions, the expectations should be done by the tests. I don't like that, coming from object orientation. So what I did is I just pulled the asserts into the objects as well. One thing I wanted to show you before we go that, in the workflow, how it looks, is this thing here. When I'm doing the submit, clicking the button, kind of switch, I navigate to another page. So the submit creates my thank you page and brings it back to me. Note that TypeScript, JavaScript, this only works when it works. All the other things that we, all the other cases that we had was for the error validation. We don't really navigate because that's now how it works. So instead of creating something that will work with every type available, which will look ugly, I decided to have a submit and click method separately. Again, a design choice, something that we'll need to do in order to make the code work. And I decided to do it like that. That's the POM. And that's the testable POM. So in the testable POM, all I kept in the assertion is just the data thing, calling the API and getting the data. But I pulled into the page objects. You see, I have all the typing here, which is nice. And then I have all kinds of verifies in this object, which makes more sense because now a verify title is visible, verify term box is unchecked, term box is checked. It's only in the things that happen in the registration. Thank you. Doesn't need somewhere global to have that. And obviously, tests now look like actual code. I could have stopped here, which is where most people stop, but I need to go a step further. Remember what we talked about, that a test clean code should be like prose and tell the story. So this tells me, well, let's something with more actions, like behavior, for example. Okay, so uncheck term box, verify button is disabled, click button, verify error is visible. All these things are the technobubble I was talking about, because everybody knows what a checkbox is, everybody knows what the button is, but we kind of missing the business, the application language, and we can do something about it. So let's look at how the registration works now. Okay, so I'm creating the registration page, checking the terms box, typing the first name with any first name, typing last name, typing an email with a valid email, submitting, getting a thank you page, and then verifying that the message is displayed with the first name and checking the data. Can I make it better? Of course I can make it better. And this is just by changing renaming these methods. So final boss part. I'm creating the registration page, and then instead of checking this thing, I agree to terms, because this is what it actually says here. I have read the whole terms sheet, and this is what it does. It calls the checkbox here. And then I'm not saying field text box or something like that. I said the first email is, first name is, last name is, email is, and then I do a submit, and then display thank you displays thank you with the name. If I look at the startup, because it mostly has verification in it, it will tell another story. So on startup, I'm creating the register page. It displays the title. The inputs are empty. Promotions are requested. And I could, as I'm thinking, promotions requested as default. Terms not agreed to, and therefore you cannot submit, which basically says that it is disabled. So this is the same test as before, but the application level, the language is different. Would it work with your code? I don't know. It really depends on the language of the application that people are used to. If you think about behavior-driven development, for example, this is like starting to look like a language of the user that you'd use in feature files and stuff like that. So the idea of just clinging to the frameworks is something that we usually do, but we can go a higher level, and this will be like a much clearer thing that a non-developer, someone who can read code, but not non-developer, will actually can read and know that tells me that this is not the application logic that we're after, or this is exactly what I'm looking for. So you can get in other people like product stuff like that, or testers, non-automation testers, to look at the code and even create this upfront and tell you, well, this is the sequence that we're looking for, and then go develop that. Okay, thank you, Kermit. We dove back. And what do we have in terms of clean tests? Well, we have clearer tests, obviously. They're organized better due to the page objects and the folders. And like I said, it's important for us to know not just where things are, where to put things that happens on the same functionality, same screen, because it's not just like we created a folder that makes sense to us and reduced the number of tests in each file. We also created a place at like signal to tell us where to put the next test is, where we can run just these kind of tests together without like selecting everything because we don't know where is where. The tests are more focused and they tell a story that the user sees, the user experiences, rather than what elements happen to be on the screen at that time. And if you go back to what we wanted from the tests, this is what we get. We get less time to understanding. It's going to be safer understanding these tests, safer maintaining them, changing the code, and also safer to change the code, tested code, because we understand the test better. We spend less time there. The time is more effective and less risky. And this is what we want from our clean tests. And this is what I wanted to share with you today. So first of all, thank you for coming today and joining. If you have any questions, put them in the chat or the question box. I want to remind you that these things are covered in a variety of workshops and trainings that I do or consulting. So if you have like a mess of tests, maybe I can help you. You don't have a mess of tests, maybe you should start there. These are the ways to get in touch with me. Check out the YouTube channel. There are, apart from the webinar recordings, there are short videos there, all kinds of things. Well, not all kinds of things, testing, development, stuff like that. You can find there. Thank you for coming today. Have a nice evening, rest of the day, whatever you're having. And I hope to see you again in the next ones. Thank you. Bye-bye.